Greetings to my dearest friends and my sworn enemies. Today, we're continuing on the world building. I said I loved it, I meant it, and I'm going to prove it. We're going to do a series of short videos on world building. As many as I can think up, actually, because, like I said, I love talking about it. Love doing it. So, today, settings, maps, all things that have to do with the actual literal world. This is obviously one of the most important parts of world building. If you don't have an actual physical world described for the story to take place in, you're going to be falling short. Everything kind of goes up from there. You know, life didn't just happen on this planet. The planet had to be here first. So, the first deep dive video, the first specific subject video, is going to be on that. Settings, maps, etc. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a map together. I'm going to switch over to screen record in a second, and we're going to MS Paint build a very rough map together. It's going to look kind of like the rough map that I drew for my world, and this will give you an idea of the basic process to go through. And if you have a PC, you have MS Paint, and I think Mac has an equivalent. So you have some kind of software on your computer, if you have a personal computer, that you can do this on. And I bet even a lot of tablets have it too. So no excuses. If you have some kind of electronic device, you're capable of putting together one of these maps for your world. And even if you never have a nice professional version drawn up for your readers to see, you still have it. And it helps you keep track of things. It helps you remember where things are. It gives you a mental picture to reference so that you can be more in-depth and organic when you're describing settings, when your characters are talking about things, and in the whole way the world flows together. And you'll see what I mean as we're drawing the map, or at least I hope you do. All right, so you can see here we have a map, and we're just going to start filling it in. We're going to start with the assumption that this is an Earth-like planet. So our poles are going to be ice, and that's a big ocean section we have in between our poles. And I've always liked archipelagos. I think they're fascinating, and I think they're a beautiful setting to have. So we're going to start with an archipelago over here. And we're just going to start with some oval shapes up there and start making these a little bit more organic, using a brush to make these not so perfectly oval. Just kind of, you know, tack them out, bring them out a little bit, and make them look like actual islands that would form in nature. Just going to brush it in. You can make them however you want. Keep in mind there are some really funny shaped islands in real life, and there's some really crazy stuff that nature does on its own sometimes. So you can have weird shaped islands and almost perfect shaped islands if you want. That's on you, especially in a fantasy setting you can. Now you saw a second ago I increased the space of water between those two because I wanted those separated more, and now we're filling in some greenery on these ones that are bigger because those are obviously going to be big enough to support ecosystems, and these smaller ones are going to have much smaller ecosystems. And now that we have the ecosystems on them, that's what the green, you know, we got some forests. We're going to put inlets and ponds on them as we want. And that's me trying to figure out if there's a better color setting because I'm partially colorblind. So the way the coloring is, it was actually a little bit hard for me to see that blue against that green. And if you have color deficit issues, I'm sure you'll do some stuff similar to that. Now we're going to build a big central landmass. And do the same thing, tack it out, fill it out, make it not so perfectly round. This is going to be our main landmass for this world. And we're starting with swamp brown, and I'm going to put a big desert here at the equator because, like I said, this is an Earth-like planet. So this is going to have a belt of desert on the central landmass here. There we go. Happy little desert right across the equator there. And the desert's going to be surrounded by this greenery. And initially I wasn't sure if I wanted to have the entire continent be greenery or if I wanted to have a lot of it be a desolate ground. So I started with that swamp brown, and then later I decide to fill in this whole thing with green. Building some flowing water systems right here. Now, if you know anything about water, you know that that big Great Lake up at the top is at a higher elevation, and these rivers run down to lower elevations. And I always think that it's really cool to have mountains in the middle of lakes, so I'm putting one in there because I think it's cool. And we're gonna put another one next to it. So I got this big mountain system right in the middle of this Great Lake. I think that looks really cool. And I decided we're gonna make these green, and we're just gonna add one little swamp off to the side. Now that brown can be a swamp, or it can be desolate land that nothing grows there for some reason, whatever. Okay, we're gonna use some shapes, keep making this a non-perfect circle. Perfect circles don't typically show up in nature that often. All right, so now that we got that looking less like a perfect circle, gonna add some more mountains over here in the desert. And yeah, that's nice and mountainy. And one great big mountain over here by this smaller lake down at the bottom of my continent. And now we're gonna add another not central, but another great big landmass over here. And we're gonna fill that in a little bit more. And we're gonna wrap it around to the other side of the map. Remember, if you're making a planet map, that's important. You gotta wrap your land masses around. And we're gonna give this land masses some greenery and some lakes as well. That lower landmass, I decide that's gonna just be forest, just pure forest, pure greenery. And now we're coming up here, and I'm trying to decide how I want to section off the areas of this continent that are civilized. So at first I'm deciding maybe I'll use these squares to denote cities, but then I says to myself, well, I need to pick the territory the civilization is going to be in first. So I use these lines to say this is the territory the civilization lives in, and then I use the squares to say wherever there's a city or a town. We put some by the lakes, we put one over by the mountain, because typically you mine mountains for resources. And then fill those in, and voila. See? Now this whole thing took me maybe 20 minutes. And we have a rough map to start filling in with a story. We can start putting any additional stuff we think up in there, start giving regions history, start giving regions culture. We have this archipelago that's basically unexplored, do all kinds of stuff with it. Now, again, even if your readers never see it, even if you never send that map away to a professional artist to have it done up to be professional quality to put in your book, having that map is invaluable to you. It reminds you how many mountains there are on your planet. It reminds you how many islands are in this archipelago without you having to write it down. You don't have to have a separate document for your notes. You don't have to have a notepad by your desktop while you write. None of that bullshit. You can literally just have this one picture. You can save it to your phone. You can put it as your computer backdrop. You can print it out on a sheet of paper, and you can just glance at it, and all the information you need to reference is right there in the picture, right there.
Oh yeah, right there.
So let's say your characters are having a conversation about the archipelago, and you forget how many islands are in there. Let's say the archipelago is a big topic of discussion because your civilization hasn't explored it yet. People love talking about it because they're fascinated. It's like Bermuda's Triangle to them. They're going to talk about it a lot. And if you know how many islands are there, you're going to prevent yourself from tripping up. So you can constantly just look at that sheet that you printed off, or flip to your desktop and look at the background. And you'll never say, well, there's 5 islands. Oh no, there were 7. Or was there 8? And you won't have a bunch of errors that you have to go back and fix later, because your world building was set and it was right there. Right there. That's the beauty of having that map. It keeps you consistent. It helps you avoid stupid little errors like that you have to go back and find during the final edit, or editors have to find. And some editors charge by the hour, so if they have to correct stupid little stuff like that, it's going to cost more. And if they're not a really, really good editor, they might miss stuff like that. So now you've just published a book where at one point you say there's 7 islands in the archipelago, but at another point you say there's 9. Well, you never would have got the number wrong if the picture was right there, taped to your desk. So that's the value. That keeps you consistent. That's the value of that map that really helps you hone in on that world building and really be detailed and consistent. And I can't overstate it enough because it's just so useful. It's so useful. And the other thing is you can start labeling that map up with town names, region names, all kinds of stuff. And you can expand that map and attach notes to specific places about the story. You can say, this happens here, this happens there, this happens there. Especially if you print out one and have a paper copy, then you can start making notes on a bunch of paper copies. However you want to do it. The point is, having this visual reference helps keep you straight without having a big long summary written up in a Word document, or without having a notepad where you have a bunch of hastily scribbled notes, or a notepad on your computer where you have a bunch of hastily typed notes. The visual reference makes things a lot faster a lot of the time. And now the next thing to consider is cities and towns. If you're going to be going to a bunch of cities and towns, you're probably not going to want to sit down and draw out a map for each and every single one. But if you're going to be in one city for the whole book, or even a series of books, you might want to sit down and draw out a map of that city. I never drew out a map of any of my cities, but the primary city that my character lives in and where we spend a good section of my first book, I have a very good visual map in my head. I know exactly how that city looks in my head, and I'm good at that, keeping stuff straight like that in my dome. So if you have that skill, you might be able to get away without doing your city map and whatnot. But I personally would, if I only had one city that my story took place in, and I was going to be running all over that city, I would definitely draw up a quick rudimentary map for that city. Primarily because if we're going to be in one city for the entire story, we're probably going to be all over it. And again, it helps keep you straight, and you can start getting detailed with how things look. And when characters talk about details, when characters interact with details in the world, it's much more organic, and it's much more believable, and it's fleshed out. So the next thing to talk about after cities is specific structures. Specific structures are obviously going to be the places where your characters return to a bunch, or places where big events happen. So you're going to specify what that structure looks like, especially if it's not similar to any of the surrounding architecture. If you have a city that's basically what a modern city looks like, and then you have this one building that's like a Gothic cathedral, you definitely want to describe that cathedral in detail, be as vivid and picturesque in your language as you can, and that's going to give your reader a very good idea of how different from the surrounding city this is. If it looks just like everything else, you could say that, but if you say that, you have to make sure you've described everything else previously in the book, preferably a few times spaced away from each other, so that your reader has a ingrained idea of how your city looks. So that's two different approaches to, structure and structure description, and both of them are valid depending on what you want to do. I personally like distinct settings that are away from how everything else looks, because I just think it lends the structure the obvious importance that it's due as a main setting or a a place where a main event takes place. So scaling down even more, obviously we have individual rooms. Individual rooms are small and personal. We describe them when this is a place our character is going to spend a lot of time or something important is going to happen. If they just pass through a room, like they go into a storage locker to get something, you don't need to spend any time describing that room. Just say they went into the storage locker, they retrieved it. But if they're going in there to spend a lot of time or having an important conversation, describe that room a bit. You could say the walls were black, the orange was trim, the whole thing felt extremely depressing. And what was that smell? Old dog? Yeah, probably old dog. Like that. And just that little bit of description gives the reader a picture in their head. But you need to go beyond that if it's a room that's going to continue to pop up. So you could start talking about the posters on the walls. You could start talking about furniture. If you're in some place like a bedroom or a house and it belongs to a character that you've put a lot of thought into and you've fleshed out a lot, you can describe personal objects. Like if you were to write the setting of this room and the story is about me and my YouTube channel, you would definitely describe my jungle juice jug that pops up in like half my videos, right? Because that's an important object to me. And the story, if the story was about my YouTube channel. So things like that, describing those detailed items and picking specific items to focus in on that are important to your character. Again, it's going to make it really organic. It's going to give it that fleshed out detail that makes it feel like you actually put thought into your world building. Now, we've gone from building your planet down to building a room. And here's kind of a master tip that applies to all of it. Whether you're building a world or a city or a town or a building or a room, you can use this tip to kind of flesh them all out a little better. The tip is to use your reader's imagination. Make them do the work. And here's how you do it. So, people love to associate things. That's one of the natural functions of our brain. We like to associate things with other things. It's how we form connections. It's how we structure the world in our minds. Okay? So, you pick a few key things that you think people will form strong emotional opinions about, and they'll form connections to that thing and use that as a jumping off point to propagate. So what I mean by that is, let's say you describe a world with a lot of mountains. Mountains typically have two things, snow and trees. So if you say your world has a lot of mountains, people are instantly going to think that your world is covered in snow and trees and mountains. Okay? And it works on any scale. Let's say you are describing a town and you say this town has a lot of farms and lumber mills. Well, people typically associate things like stables and tractors and big fields of corn with farms, and they typically associate big heavy equipment, big sawdust piles, and loud noise with lumber mills. So they're instantly going to imagine those things in connection with your town of farms and lumber mills. Okay? That's a really quick cheat / hack / tool that you can use as a writer to not have to describe your scenery or your setting nearly as much, but it's still just as fleshed out because your reader just instantly started associating things with what you already said. So they'll remember your town like you described it in detail, but really you only gave a very select few pieces of information that made them create the detail in their minds. So you got to be creative with that tip. You have to know what to say to get the reader's imagination flowing. And that's where knowing your demographic is critical. You have to know who you're writing to and what that demographic typically associates with what. And that's kind of a knowing people thing and being a people person / studying humanity kind of thing. If you're not very good at people, you might just have to write your setting in detail. So that's a very useful tool, but you have to understand people and understand how the human mind works a little bit to use it effectively. If you're not much of a people person, that tool might fall flat for you. So be careful using it. And again, a good way to make sure you're using it effectively: beta readers. The other quick little tip that I'm going to give you is when you're describing a setting, especially if it's an important setting, you're going to want to engage as many senses as you can. If you can engage all 5 senses, that's going to be a very fleshed out setting. So describe smell, describe ambient noise, describe textures of floors and ceilings and furniture. The more senses you can engage, the more fleshed out the setting is. Even if you never really described, let's say a room, even if you never did much description of the things that were in the room, if you engaged all 5 senses and gave good, vivid descriptions of what the sense was experiencing, the reader is going to pick things to put in that room. They're going to have a mental image of that room. I guarantee it. Everyone's different. Some people engage sight primarily, most people. Some people engage hearing primarily. Some people are very smell based. Some people are very touch based. If you hit all 5 senses, people will paint a picture of your room in their head. They'll know what it looks like in their head, even if you never say a damn thing about how that room looks. That's just how the mind works. So guys, that's kind of my World Building 102 video on settings and geography and stuff like that. I hope you found this video helpful and not just me doing a mumbling rant. My throat's a little bit dry, sorry. Expect more of these to come. Like I said, I really enjoy world building. If you have one that you would like a video on before anything else, let me know in the comments. In the meantime, like, share, subscribe, ring the damn bell, do all the YouTube things. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.